Imagine stealing $670,000 from a locked train while it was speeding through the night. Armed police officers were sitting only a few feet away. Hundreds of passengers were sleeping peacefully. The doors never opened. No emergency alarm was raised. No one reported seeing thieves. And yet, by sunrise, more than $500,000 had vanished. Investigators were left with one impossible question. How do you rob a moving train without anyone noticing? For nearly 2 years, nobody had an answer. Police searched for witnesses, examined the railway line, questioned suspects, and chased one dead end after another. Nothing explained how thieves could enter a sealed railway coach, steal cash, and disappear without stopping the train. Then, the investigation took an unexpected turn. Not because someone confessed, not because the stolen money suddenly appeared, but because detectives stopped looking at the train and started looking at the phones, along with something almost no one expected: satellite imagery. That decision would eventually uncover one of the boldest and most carefully planned train robberies in modern Indian history. On the night of August 8, 2016, an ordinary passenger train departed from Salem in the southern Indian state of Tamil Nadu. Among hundreds of passengers was one railway coach unlike any other. No passengers were allowed inside. Its doors were locked. The coach had been sealed by officials. Inside was nearly $40 million in worn-out currency, the equivalent of Rs. 342 crore at the time. Packed inside 24 wooden boxes, under the custody of the Reserve Bank of India. The money wasn't being delivered to a bank. It was being transported to be destroyed and replaced. It should have been one of the safest cash shipments in the country. Instead, it became one of India's greatest unsolved railway mysteries. Tonight, we open the investigation. Part 1, the money train. On most nights, train. Number 11064 looked completely ordinary. It was a regular overnight passenger service, running from Salem to Chennai, in the southern Indian state of Tamil Nadu. Families boarded with luggage. Students searched for their seats. Vendors made their final rounds before departure. To everyone on board, it was just another overnight journey. But hidden somewhere inside that train was a railway coach unlike any other. Unlike the passenger coaches, this one wasn't carrying people. It wasn't carrying mail or valuable cargo. Instead, it carried stacks of worn-out banknotes worth nearly $40 million. The cash had been collected from 3 major banks: the State Bank of India, Indian Bank, and Indian Overseas Bank. These weren't freshly printed bills. They were old currency notes. Some were torn. Some were badly damaged. Others had simply reached the end of their circulation life. According to officials, they were being transported to the Reserve Bank of India, where they would eventually be destroyed and replaced with new currency. But to protect the shipment, officials took extraordinary precautions. The money was packed inside 224 heavy wooden boxes. Every box was counted, documented, and sealed. Once everything had been loaded, the railway coach itself was locked from the outside. No passengers were allowed inside. No railway staff could enter during the journey. The only people responsible for protecting the shipment were the armed security officers, traveling in the coach immediately next door. In total, 18 armed personnel were assigned to the operation, including an officer of assistant commissioner rank, along with members of the Railway Protection Force and local police. Their jobs seemed simple: guard the coach, escort the train safely to Chennai, and hand the shipment over to the Reserve Bank. On paper, it looked almost impossible to rob. A locked coach, armed guards, hundreds of passengers, and a train that never stopped long enough for anyone to risk an attack. Everything about the operation suggested the money would arrive safely. It never did, because sometime during that overnight journey, someone accomplished what investigators initially believed should have been impossible. Part 2, the impossible heist. It was Monday, August 8th, 2016, shortly after 9:00 p.m. Train number 11064 rolled out of Salem Junction, beginning its overnight journey toward Chennai. For most passengers, nothing seemed unusual. Some settled into their seats with books or newspapers. Others chatted quietly with family members. Children slowly drifted off to sleep. Outside, the lights of Salem faded into the darkness. The train gathered speed, heading east across the countryside. No one suspected that one coach carried a fortune, or that before sunrise, someone would steal part of it. Yet the cash coach wasn't just locked, it was sealed. Officials had secured the doors before departure. According to investigators, the only practical way inside was to unlock the doors from the outside. But no one had the keys, and the armed escort never reported anything unusual. Next door, 18 armed officers remained on duty, separated from the cache by nothing more than a steel wall. If anyone tried to break through the doors, the guards would hear it immediately. If someone attempted to force the locks, the damage would be obvious. From every angle, the shipment appeared secure. At least, that's what everyone believed. The first part of the route created an opportunity that very few people understood. For roughly 140 kilometers, the train was pulled by a diesel locomotive. That section of track had no overhead electric wires. After about 2 hours, the train would reach Salem Junction. There, the diesel engine would be replaced with an electric locomotive. Once that happened, everything changed. The train would continue beneath 25,000-volt overhead power lines. Anyone standing on the roof would be risking instant death. If someone planned to approach the train from above, they had only one window of opportunity: the first 2 hours, no more. As the train raced through the night, the armed escort remained unaware of any danger. Passengers slept. Stations came and went. Nothing appeared out of place. There were no screams, no gunshots, no emergency stop, no reports of suspicious activity. The journey continued, exactly as planned. But somewhere, between Salem and Salem, according to investigators, a group of thieves allegedly carried out one of the most daring robberies ever attempted on a moving train. And remarkably, no one noticed. Part 3, The Discovery. Just before dawn, on August 9th, 2016, the train rolled into Chennai Egmore Station. For the passengers, the journey was over. People gathered their luggage. Families stepped onto the platform. Another overnight train had completed another routine trip. For the security team, however, their work wasn't finished. The cash shipment still had to be handed over to the Reserve Bank of India. Before that could happen, the officers decided to carry out one final inspection, a routine check, one they had performed countless times before. None of them expected what they were about to find. As an officer unlocked the sealed coach, the heavy door swung open. At first, everything seemed normal. The wooden boxes were still stacked inside. The coach was quiet. The doors showed no signs of forced entry. Then, someone noticed something unusual. Light. Bright morning light was pouring into the coach. That shouldn't have been possible. There were no windows large enough to let in that much light. The officers looked up and froze. There, in the roof of the railway coach, was a freshly cut hole, large enough for a person to climb through. For a moment, no one spoke. The coach had been sealed before departure. The doors had remained locked. The guards had reported nothing unusual. Yet somehow, someone had entered from above. The discovery became even more disturbing. Investigators began inspecting the wooden crates, one by one. Most of them were exactly as they had been packed, still sealed, still full. But then, they reached another stack. 5 boxes had been opened. Cash bundles were missing. Some loose banknotes were scattered across the floor. It appeared the thieves hadn't had enough time to empty every box completely. According to officials, approximately $670,000, around R575 crore, had disappeared, out of a shipment worth nearly $40 million. It wasn't the largest financial loss, but that wasn't what shocked investigators. The real mystery was this: how had anyone managed to steal anything at all? Nothing about the crime made sense. The coach had remained locked. The seals appeared untouched. The armed escort had traveled only a few feet away for the entire journey. Hundreds of passengers had been on board. Not one reported hearing metal being cut. Not one reported seeing people climbing across the roof. No alarms had been triggered. No witnesses came forward. It was, for all practical purposes, a locked room mystery. Except, the room had been moving at nearly 45 miles per hour. Investigators now faced a question that seemed almost impossible to answer. When had the thieves struck? And more importantly, how had they escaped without leaving a trace? Part 4, Chasing a Ghost. The investigation began with the most obvious question. When did the robbery happen? Investigators carefully reconstructed every mile of the train's journey. They examined the timetable, interviewed railway staff, questioned the security escort, and studied every scheduled stop. One section of the route immediately caught their attention: the first 140 kilometers between Salem and Vritachalam. During that stretch, the train was pulled by a diesel locomotive. There were no overhead electrical wires, which meant if someone wanted to climb onto the roof, this was the safest opportunity. According to investigators, the thieves may have boarded the train shortly after it left Salem. Hidden among the passengers, they allegedly made their way onto the roof. Then, while the train raced through the darkness, they began cutting through the steel ceiling. If that theory was correct, they had less than 2 hours to complete the entire operation. Cut through the roof, lower someone into the coach, locate the cash, pass bundles of currency back onto the roof, and disappear before the train reached Vritachalam. It sounded almost impossible, but it wasn't the only theory. There was another possibility. At Vritachalam Junction, the train made an unusually long stop, nearly 1 hour. The reason was simple. The diesel locomotive had to be removed and replaced with an electric engine. Could the thieves have used that hour to climb onto the roof, cut through the coach, and steal the money? At first, the idea seemed reasonable, but the more investigators examined it, the less likely it became. The station was busy. Passengers walked along the platform. Railway employees moved between the coaches. The armed security escort was only a few feet away. Cutting through steel with power tool would have created sparks, noise, and enough attention for someone to notice. Investigators eventually concluded that carrying out such a robbery in the middle of a crowded station would have been extraordinarily risky. Their attention shifted back to the moving train. If the robbery really happened while the train was moving, the thieves faced another deadly obstacle. Once the train left Vritachalam, it entered an electrified railway line. Above every coach were overhead cables carrying approximately 25,000 volts. Anyone standing on the roof risked instant electrocution. That meant the operation had to be completed before the locomotive change. There would be no second chance, no opportunity to return. Everything had to go exactly according to plan. Every minute mattered. Every movement had to be calculated. And according to investigators, the thieves pulled it off without alerting a single passenger or a single guard. It was beginning to look less like a robbery and more like a military operation. Days turned into weeks. Weeks became months. Detectives searched for fingerprints, collected forensic evidence, interviewed railway employees, questioned passengers, and followed every lead they could find. Nothing. No eyewitness, no reliable suspect, no stolen cash, no confession. The investigation had reached a standstill. Some officers wondered whether the case would ever be solved. Then, nearly 2 years later, one investigator proposed a completely different approach. Instead of asking, who stole the money? He asked a different question. Whose phones were near the train at the exact moment the robbery happened? That single question would change everything. Part 5, Breaking the Impossible Case. Nearly 2 years had passed. The robbery remained unsolved. Every traditional lead had gone nowhere. No eyewitnesses, no fingerprints that identified the thieves, no surveillance footage, no reliable suspects. Investigators were chasing ghosts. Then, one officer suggested abandoning conventional detective work altogether. Instead of focusing on the stolen money, they would focus on something almost everyone carries: a mobile phone. It was a simple idea. If the robbery happened between Salem and Vrida, then every phone connected to cell towers along that route had left behind a digital footprint. The question was no longer, who robbed the train? It became, who shouldn't have been there? Investigators requested mobile phone records, covering the 2-hour journey. The data was enormous. Hundreds of devices had connected to towers along the railway line. Most belonged to ordinary passengers, railway employees, local residents. One by one, those numbers were eliminated until a small group caught investigators' attention. Several mobile phones didn't belong to anyone from Tamil Nadu. Instead, they traced back to Madhya Pradesh, more than 1,000 miles away. Even more surprising, many of those numbers were linked to the same region. It wasn't proof, but it was the first real lead the investigation had uncovered. Now, detectives continued building their case. Then they turned to an unexpected source: satellite imagery. According to investigators, they sought archived satellite images covering the railway route during the night of the robbery. Combined with mobile phone analysis, those images allegedly helped narrow their search. Piece by piece, investigators began reconstructing how the operation may have unfolded. The mystery was finally beginning to crack. As investigators followed the evidence, suspects began to emerge. Police carried out operations across multiple locations. Several people were arrested. Others remained at large. According to investigators, most of the evidence suggested the robbery had not been random. It had allegedly been planned, weeks, perhaps months, in advance. The thieves appeared to know exactly which coach carried the cash, exactly when the train would travel beneath open skies, and exactly how much time they had before the route became electrified. It wasn't luck. It was preparation. The theft itself was remarkable, but the investigation may have been even more extraordinary. Detectives solved the case not through a dramatic confession, not because stolen cash suddenly surfaced, but by following digital footprints that the suspects never realized they had left behind. A reminder that in the modern world, even the most carefully planned crime can leave behind invisible evidence. The thieves allegedly stole around $670,000 from a train carrying nearly $40 million. In purely financial terms, it was only a small fraction of the shipment. But the amount wasn't what made headlines. It was the method. A sealed railway coach, armed guards just feet away, a hole cut into the roof, and a robbery that allegedly unfolded while the train continued racing through the night. Even today, the case remains one of the most extraordinary train robberies ever investigated in India. It proved that criminals can spend months planning what seems like the perfect crime. But it also proved something else. Technology never sleeps. Phones record movements. Networks preserve connections. Digital traces remain long after people disappear. Sometimes the smallest signal becomes the key to solving the biggest mystery. Tonight, we open the investigation.